Hello coach and welcome to a new Futsal Talk. Today I would like to introduce the offensive triangles. Let me first define the main meaning of the offensive triangle. As we have talked in the other Futsal Talk offensive dualities, the duality is the association or the connection between two players. When we add to this connection or to this action the third player, we are talking about the offensive triangles. We define that as a triangle because it's the most common shape that we will produce when we are working or creating offensive actions using three players, but there are some exceptions that we will talk later. We have two different groups of offensive triangles based on the tactical intentions, in the same way that we have explained that concept in the dualities or the offensive dualities Futsal Talk. We have the offensive triangles that want to work using with or support or giving support, and we have another group that is that the main goal is to work in depth or in a vertical way. Let me give you some example. The pivot connections, when we are connecting with the pivot and we create in this kind of triangle, the offensive triangle, we are working with depth intention or vertical intention. But if we are creating this kind of movement and creating this kind of offensive triangles, we are working in a width way and as a support intention. It's very important to understand that, because in our team we need to try to create different tasks to develop different tactical intentions. Now it's time to let me define with more detail the third player concept, because I think it's very important to understand that. As we have explained in the offensive duality Futsal Talk, we have a connection between two players. The player with the ball is called the first player. The player who will receive the pass will become the second player, and the third player could be worked by two different players, depending always in the initial positioning of the team. In this case we have the 3-1 positioning. This is the first player, this is the second player, because that player is trying to move the ball to this side, and if we are moving from the side to the center close to this connection between these two players, that is the third player. But imagine that is the pivot who is moving close to the action. Right now the pivot becomes the third player. Another example of that to understand the third concept is that if we are using the 4-0 positioning and we are playing between these two players, this is the first player, this is the second player, because we are trying to move the ball to this direction or to this side, and now we have two options to play as a third player. Imagine that player decides to move inside the structure to create this triangle. This is the third player. But now we have another option, that is the other winger. If the other winger decides to move inside the structure, this is the new third player. It's important to understand that, because the third player concept gives you a lot much offensive options in your team. It's important to understand that and to work that using different kind of tasks that you could use or you could learn in our 3-player principle course. Now it's time to explain the 4 different main offensive triangles, structures that we could work or in our teams. The first one, if we are using the 3-1 initial positioning, is the dualities using the third player. Imagine that we are working a duality, an offensive duality between these two players. As we have explained before, if we are using the third player concept, we could add to this duality another option, that is to play with this player. What kind of actions I could develop using the third player in a duality? Easy to understand. Imagine that we have the vertical wall pass duality, that is that action. I move here and appear, and now it's time to attack in a depth way. Imagine that I could develop that using the third player. When the ball is moving, and appear between or close to the ball, and I work the same action on the side. It's the same, but I'm using the third player. Why I could do that, or what is the main reason to use the third player instead of the duality, the common duality? It's easy to understand. When we are, or is related with a defensive concept, where we are working from the center to the side, we're giving direction to the ball. The defensive reaction is trying to protect the space. This is the strong side where the ball is played, and this is the weak side. At that moment, the third player is not pressed, and that's the reason, if we are using the third player to collaborate, to associate with the other two teammates, empower the offensive game, because these two players are pressured, but the third player is not pressured. This is the main reason to use the third player movements in your offensive game, or your offensive model of game. We have different kind of dualities using the third player that we could develop in our teams, or in your teams. The first one is all the dualities that we could use in a width way, or as a support. The first one is the screen. We have the screen option. Remember, the screen using a duality is that movement. We could use the same action using the third player. It's an indirect screen. We are repairing from one side to another side, and now connect with the player on the side, working this new two association between these two players. We have another kind of indirect screen that we could work using the pivot, but not this kind of screen. I'm using another screen, that is this one, appearing between the pivot and the winger. When we are trying to focus the ball from the center to the side, I'm appearing between this pair. I'm creating some defensive doubts. Why we do that? It's easy to understand. I want to attract the defensive positioning or behavior to this side, and creating more offensive space to attack in different ways. Maybe in a vertical way, maybe just using some wall pass, or just to try to maintain the ball. We have different options to apply. Another duality using the third player is the direct between lines. It's easy. This is an easy action to do. The third player, instead of create a screen between these two players, appear between the defensive line, creating this pass line and creating the between lines duality. Another action is the block. We could create the indirect block. We are playing here, and we could block another player trying to create these defensive doubts between these two defensive pairs. I could attack in a vertical way after the block, or just creating a space to the player to receive the ball in a support way, support intention. Another option that I could work, the dualities or more dualities that I could apply, are all related with the vertical intention. The parallel, the vertical wall pass, and the diagonal, using the third player. Imagine that we are playing the 4-0 positioning, initial positioning. If I want to work the indirect diagonal using, or the parallel movement using the third player, we could develop it using this one or this one. Remember, that is very important. We have two different players that could work the third player concept. I move the ball from the center, from one post center to the side, and I decided to move that and create these two different vertical dualities, wall pass or the parallel, using this player. But I could introduce the other player as a third player. When the ball is moving, I'm appearing close to my teammate and create also the parallel movement or the vertical wall pass movement. And finally, the same if we want to attack the indirect diagonal, another duality in a vertical way using the third player. How? It's easy to understand. I'm trying to move and win this line pass and creating a diagonal pass to the player that is losing or trying to lose the mark. Or maybe using the other player as a third player when we are switching the ball from one side to the another one, and suddenly we are moving from the other side the third player action. We are playing the third player action in a diagonal movement. Well, I think that the third player, the dualities with the third player, it's an important weapon to use and to develop in your teams, and my big tip is to use it, to implement it, to work it using different kind of tasks. Another group that I would like to introduce today, another offensive triangle structure that I would like to delve today is the overload. The overload, I would like to talk about two different kind of overloads. One, when we are working in depth, or when we are working in width. Imagine that we are using again the 3-1 positioning. We have the 3-1 positioning, initial positioning with the players, with the offensive team, and now it's time to develop a depth overload. Firstly, let me remind you what's the meaning of an overload. It's just when three players are in the same pass line, we are creating a develop. It's important to understand that this is the exception. When I was talking about that there's some offensive triangle that it's not following a triangle shape, this is the example of that exception. We are working with a line, creating a line, but after that movement we are creating triangles. That is very important to understand. We are creating this overload, and the main goal is to attract the three players to this pass line and trying to create more offensive space to attack. There are two main options that the second player, that is that player, this is the second player, this is the first player, and that is the third player. There are two tactical options that we could develop with that second player. The first is the reaction with or off the ball that the player is doing. The player could play the ball, just passing here, or pass the ball to the third player, or switching the ball between the defensive structure to the other side of the court. The second option is to let the ball pass to the third player directly. I don't want to play the ball, I just let the ball pass to the third player directly, trying to now attack this space. The second player has two different kind of movements that we could develop in our teams. The first movement is when, well, all is related to the movement that the second player done when I'm trying to lose my mark in a vertical way. I'm moving, imagine that I'm passing the ball here, I receive the ball again, I pass the ball again to the fixo, and I'm moving, trying to attack the space. I have two options to work. The first is the tactical intention to work as a super way or in a width way. When the ball is here, I'm trying to work some duality using the width or super intention that we have a block, a screen, or the back sole pass. I'm doing that. Let me repeat again. I'm creating this overload. I decide to let pass the ball to the third player, and now I'm moving, trying to lose my mark, and suddenly I decide to stop and to work a width or a support duality, a block, and a screen, or a back sole pass. The other option is the vertical or depth intention. Imagine that I decide to cut, trying to lose my mark, and now I try to work the diagonal pass, or I try to work the vertical wall pass, appearing close to my teammate and create this vertical pass, or also a parallel movement. I'm trying to stop and suddenly attack the space in a vertical way. We have many options to develop using these two overlaps in the 3-1 positioning. Remember, the first one is the vertical overload. Right now it's time to talk about the width overload. That is another option to develop. This width overload is this kind of positioning using the offensive heights concept. We are working just using one height in the creation and creating an overload with 3 players. The main goal is the same. I'm trying to attract all the players to the creation zone and trying to create more space to attack, more offensive space to attack. The second player has the same role that we have explained in the vertical overload. We can let the ball pass to the third player directly and attack in a super way, or doing blocks, screens, or trying to attack in a vertical way with a diagonal, with the vertical wall pass, or also with the parallel movement. All the actions that we could develop are the same. The main difference is just the initial positioning, creating one offensive height. This is very important to use and to know and to try to develop in our teams, because we are creating more offensive options to use against our rivals. Now, finally, I would like to talk about the last overload in a 4-0 positioning. That is the depth overload, a classic action that is produced by these 3 players creating one pass line between these 3 players. The main goal is the same. We want to attract the players to one side and trying the defensive players to one side and create some offensive space to attack. The second player could execute the same actions that we have explained, let the ball pass or just play the ball, and trying to attack these spaces in 2 different intentions, with a support intention or vertical intentions. Okay, I hope you enjoy this Futsal Talk. See you soon in the next Futsal Talk.